If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. Truckers, drivers, etc. Has anyone seen anything creepy on rural roads, highways, forests, etc.? I was driving very early in the morning on my way to work. It was still dark. I saw something moving across the road. As I got closer, I could see it wasn't an animal because I could see a road in the middle of it. It was moving oddly. When I finally got close enough, I realized it was a pair of shoes walking across the road. Just shoes. Right before I got parallel with them, they vanished. I was driving on a back road near my mom's house in rural Minnesota one night. The moment I flicked my high beams on, there were lots of deer in the area. The flash illuminated a large dog or wolf-like creature standing on two legs just off the side of the road. I immediately turned my beams back off, and they vanished. It creeped me out that it was so close to home at that time. I was driving down a highway at like 3:30 a.m., coming home from my boyfriend's house or something like that, and I came over the top of a hill, and about halfway down the hill, it was like a half-mile long, I saw something on the side of the road, and I just kind of stared at it as I went by and just tried to register what I was looking at, and honestly, the only way I can describe it is a 7-foot-tall mass of hair. Like a cousin from the Addams family, but huge. I got super scared and shaky for some reason, even though nothing really happened other than seeing the hair blob. I was stone sober and not tired, even though it was late. I've never seen anything like it before or since, and I just kind of tell myself it was a one-time hallucination. I didn't turn around to go back because I was 16 and had to have the car home before 4 a.m. when my mom woke up, and I was already riding the line of being late and getting in trouble, so I wasn't going to risk it to see if I was truly losing my mind or not. 15 years ago, I lived close to the border of El Dorado County and Amador County in Northern California. I was in my early 20s. The acreage I was leasing with a friend was in the middle of nowhere. Our house was far enough from the main road to warrant popping garbage and recycle bins in the back of the truck every 2 weeks, not one, as it was a hassle. The start of the driveway to the house had a lone street light. It was the only light except for my house and a neighbor about 3,000 feet away in the trees. I was standing under the light around 4 a.m. one morning while waiting for my ride. I did not have a car and was working as a vineyard laborer. The vineyard manager was going to pick me up. I'd been doing this every morning during pruning season for about a week. Enough story set up, I was standing there, under the light. Normal late night or early morning country sounds: skunks, foxes, owls, and tree leaves, and then everything went silent. The hair stood up on every centimeter of my skin, and I froze. About 400 feet up the hill in the trees across from me on the other side of the road, a low, guttural growl started. The bushes moved just enough. Have you ever had the sense that you were not welcome at the very marrow of your bones? That you were in danger? Yeah. The growl changed to a snarl, he chuffed, and he came closer. I don't know why, but I started screaming like a banshee. Fear. It was fear. My ride showed up soon after, as I was still screaming at the bushes. He laughed his ass off. I requested that my roommate drive me to the road and sit with me while I waited for my ride after that day. When I was in high school, I was a lifeguard. One weekend we had parties and would usually get off around 11 p.m. I had about a 30-minute drive home, and it was pretty rural since I lived in the country. One of the roads I took home went over the interstate, and as soon as I got over, I saw this little boy in red pajamas standing on the side of the road with his hands over his face. I swerved and kept going. Once I got maybe half a mile away, I called my dad, asking if I should call 911 or go back. He told me to call but not to come back because it could be someone trying to lure people off the road. Even today, I still question if that's what I really saw that night. Since then, it seemed like maybe once a year I had to call and report something odd I saw while driving home. About 4 years ago, I was driving home on the interstate from a concert in another city. It was probably 11:30 or 12 o'clock at night, and I was about halfway home. It had been several miles since the last exit and would be several more until the next. On the shoulder, in the beam of my headlights, I saw a man dressed in a suit jacket down on all fours, patting the ground, and looking around in a small circle. My initial impression was that he was in a similar position to Velma from Scooby-Doo when she's looking for her glasses. That was all he was doing, just there on his hands and knees, kind of patting the ground. What struck me as extremely odd is that there were no cars parked on the shoulder anywhere nearby, nothing to indicate he had come out of a vehicle. Having traveled this stretch of road many times during the day, I know that the only thing on the other side of the guardrail was empty fields. I mean, even though this was a major interstate, we were quite literally in the middle of nowhere. The nearest city was 20 miles away. I can't imagine how he got out there, dressed in a suit, so late at night and so far from much of anything. I didn't stop to check on him because I wasn't about to end up involved in something strange, but it's stuck out in my memory ever since. I'm sure there's probably an innocent explanation, but it sure as duck weirded me out. About 6 weeks ago, I turned the wrong way going home from my parents' house, in rural central Virginia, near George Washington Forest, and didn't realize it until I hit a sign telling me that state maintenance of the road ended. So I quickly looked for a safe place to turn around that was not someone's driveway, and the road ended just like that, in a crude cul-de-sac of 6 driveways that stretched out into the woods. Very eerie in the dark. The cul-de-sac, such as it was quite small, so I had to do a several-point turn to get facing the right way. When I was almost done, on my dash backup camera, I saw a hairy humanoid figure step out from the trees at the edge of a driveway, maybe 8 feet back from me, but nowhere near the house. It was about 7 feet tall but hunched over. It stopped in the middle of the driveway and stared at me, but from the side, not turning to face me. I was immediately filled with a sense of deep dread that I can't explain, and it lasted only until I couldn't see it anymore. All I know is that it wasn't a person, and it wasn't a bear. I have seen one in our yard. We live up on a mountain. I was driving back from a weekend camping trip with 2 friends. This was around 2016, in Northern California. We're driving along a dark road through the woods, 1 lane in each direction. About 10 p.m. The woods around us are mostly public land, but there are some private lots with houses way out in the wilderness here and there, and a few private access roads coming out on the main road. I saw her for a split second before I passed her. A woman standing in the middle of the road, just on the other side of the lane divider. She looked like the damn girl from The Ring, pale as hell, long dark hair hanging down, and a long white dress or nightgown. Her head was hanging forward with hair falling over her face, and her arm was up kind of limply, like she was trying to flag us down, but she wasn't quite all there. I have never hit the ducking gas pedal that hard in my life. I remember just screaming, "Nope. Nope. Not today." Both of my friends saw her too. We were freaking out the whole drive home. My friends believe in ghosts, and she does fit the description of a classic highway spirit. But I think it was something scarier that we saw that night. My first theory is that it was a trap. People hiding in the woods send out a girl as bait, looking like she's in trouble. A car stops to help her out, an easy target. But I'm leaning towards the idea that she was a victim of some kind and ran away from one of those secluded houses or someone's camp. That white dress didn't belong in the woods, and she had a limp, swaying air about her that makes me think she was on something. Could have been kidnapped and ran off to flag a car down. It could have just been a weird trip in the woods. There were definitely a lot of drugs around that area. We weren't about to be the ones to find out, though. 2 years ago, I had a very creepy experience on my way to work in the morning. I normally don't believe in supernatural stuff, but I'll be damned if that was just a normal animal. On my way to work, I often use a small road through a densely wooded area. It is a pretty long and straight road. I left home at around 4:30 a.m. and was driving, minding my business, and slowly waking up completely when I suddenly noticed what I thought was a very large dark gray or black dog sitting next to the road. As it was still dark, I couldn't make it out in full detail, so I slowed down in case it started to run across the road, but when I got closer and the headlights captured it in full, it just stood up and calmly retreated into the bushes next to the road. But as soon as it stood up, it was very clear that this was no normal dog. It was huge. Bear size at least, or even bigger, I'd say. Shorter hind legs, a very muscular front, a weirdly long snout and pointy ears, and a bushy tail. It walked almost like some sort of hyena, but always on all fours. Big predators are very rare in this area, and if there is a sighting about every 2 years or so, it is only of lone wolves or very rarely of a bear wandering through. This stretch of road has always given me the creeps, but now the fear has a face. One thing I noticed the last few days was that there were no other animals around. Normally there are always some deer, some foxes, or, if I get lucky, even a badger around. But this week? None. Not even a bird. There had also been some reports of missing livestock in this area. 2 sheep went missing the last week, and yesterday a horse was lost. It was later found brutally ripped apart and partially consumed. I don't know if the unknown canine creature is responsible for this, but I highly suspect it. My mom, daughter, and infant grandson were in the car at night, driving through the country from the Augusta, Georgia area to the Savannah, Georgia area. We were between Waynesboro and Millen on a divided 4-lane highway, and I was driving my new car, which has automatic high/low beams and adaptive cruise control. Because I had family with me, including a baby, and I was in my new car, I was extra cautious and had my eyes peeled. I was in the left lane, and approximately a few car lengths in front of me, I saw something materialize in the right lane. It happened quickly, and it was too big to be a dog but too small to be a deer. I could see through it, but it was more solid around the spine area. As soon as it formed, which just took a second or two, it took off, running at lightning speed towards the side of the road and into the brush. It was a grayish color, and my mind was desperately trying to figure out what I had just seen when my daughter said, "What was that?" I was so thankful she'd seen it too. I asked her to describe what she'd seen, and it was exactly the same thing I'd also witnessed. There's no way it ran across my lane prior to it literally just appearing, because if it had, I would have had to react to it, and my car would have automatically reacted as well. I have no idea what we saw, but it definitely made me more accepting of the idea of interdimensional beings. So I live in Manitoba, Canada, and I have a scary one. My friend and I were driving from Winnipeg, MB, to Gillam, MB. For reference, this is about a 12-hour drive north in the province, up near Churchill. After hitting Thompson, we got onto the 280. This highway has signs saying to bring winter gear to survive, etc., as help is hours away from any direction, and that's only if the weather allows you to walk hours to get cell reception, picture -40°C and only reception in 2 spots in a 4-hour stretch. Anyways, we are driving up there in the autumn, but a blizzard starts out of nowhere, with no lights and no cars we have passed for quite a while. We have passed Split Lake by about 50 kilometers, and out of nowhere, the blizzard stops for a second. When this happens, we see a snowy owl come right towards the windscreen. I slow down as fast as I can, as this all happened in a split second, and it is pitch black out there. The sun sets early in the north. Honestly, the only way I can describe it is as time slowing down. The snowy owl turns into this really messed up face as it's about to hit the windscreen, like the movie poster Slender Man face, mixed with the bat coming through the windscreen in Mothman prophecies, and the blizzard starts again. We look at each other shocked and then immediately look to the dash of the car, where GPS and all that shows. This is a newer car, 2018, and we were listening to music that we downloaded beforehand, knowing there was no service. On the dash, and on my phone screen, is the face. We started freaking out and tearing up immediately, but I knew I had to stay calm because this road is no joke. I have also experienced paranormal occurrences in the past. I was driving in a blizzard in pitch black with that face on the screen, and we tried to turn my phone on and off for the next 2 hours of the drive, but it wouldn't go away. Even when my phone was off, it was still on the dash. We experienced a few more bizarre things on the way, and the feeling was horrendous, like it was taunting us or something, given that it was there the rest of the drive and throwing random obstacles along the way. When we finally came around the lake and were almost in town, my music started playing again out of nowhere, and the face on my phone and dash was gone. It was one of the most memorable 2 hours of my life, and I can't explain it. Talking with indigenous folk around the area, it's common for weird things to happen along that stretch of highway. So, I live in rural R. When I lived with my parents, I had a night shift job at a factory. Sometimes, I'd leave early, and I'd be driving home at 1 a.m. or a little bit later. Oftentimes, I would see what seemed to be shapes ducking out of the way of my headlights, as if the light would harm them. I always assumed it was in my head and that the people were just my headlights casting weird shadows. Well, one night, a coworker, maybe 20 years older than me, he grew up on a reservation, and I were talking about weird things we'd seen. He looks at me and asks, "So, you live in, town name? Have you ever seen the shadow people at night?" I swear, my blood ran cold, and I froze. He assured me that he'd seen them too. Then he told me that his grandmother, a full-blooded Native American, had warned him as a kid to never stop and investigate. That they were dark spirits and angry ones. The last time I saw the shadow people was probably 5 years ago. I moved out of my parents' house and into the town I worked in. Well, about a year ago, my wife and I bought a house in the boonies. I work a different job, but I get off work anywhere between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. I assumed that I'd begin seeing the shadows again living out here, but strangely, I never have, though my new little town has a history involving violent rebellion of some sort, and I have seen a few strange fog/misty figures. As for the small town my parents live in, now just my mom, the town used to be a plantation town. There's even an old cemetery on a hill, with a large rock marking it. It has an arch with the word Slave Cemetery on it. Maybe the shadow people have something to do with that. Trucker here. A few years ago, I was traveling through Ute Native land in New Mexico on Highway 491. 491 used to be Route 666, but they changed it a few years ago. I think people were stealing the signs. Anyways, I'm in the middle of the desert around midnight, no lights or civilization for miles, when up in the sky there's a huge, orange flash. The orange flash quickly inflated into a giant ball, bigger than the sun. It even had a fiery-looking texture to it. Suddenly, the orange ball disappeared, and the entire desert sky, horizon to horizon, flashed a bright yellow, lighting up everything around me like it was daytime. Then everything went back to normal. This all happened within a few seconds, but it was definitely the weirdest thing I've seen on the road. I am from St. Cloud, and I have had more than a few experiences growing up. I now live in the Twin Cities, but my dad still lives in St. Joseph, which is a few miles out of St. Cloud and very rural. I saw a stick man when driving out to swim at Middle Skunk Lake in Avon, about 10 miles from St. Cloud. Me and my family would go out there multiple times a week during the summer to go swimming at the beach. One night we were driving back on the back roads through the country, right by St. John's University, which has a whole bunch of creepy history of its own. There were only random farms situated amongst the rolling fields and woods in the area. There is a long stretch where there are corn fields on both sides of the road, but on the right side there is a small area of corn that runs directly up to the woods, probably 100 to 150 yards from the road. I remember always having a nervous or anxious feeling when driving this stretch due to the woods, not to mention that this area just had a strange vibe to it. Story 2. One night while driving back, I had my head rested against the window in the back of the minivan and happened to see movement at the edge of the cornfield and woods to my right. I broke from my daze and looked closer, and up ahead at the tree line/cornfield border was a man standing next to the tree, almost like a statue. I still remember the absolute terror I felt when I saw this, and we were going to be parallel with him or it in a matter of seconds. I remember that I wondered how I could see him since the corn was rather high, probably beginning middle of August, and I could see almost from his waist up. He was so tall and skinny, and he looked almost like he was composed of sticks. But I also remember he had on a red flannel shirt that was tattered and torn up in what looked like a hood. But the scariest thing was that I saw him moving for a second, and then he froze as if he knew I was seeing him, and he just stood there staring straight ahead. When we were almost parallel to him, I heard a voice in my head say, "Look at me," and as we became parallel to him, he had this smile on his face, and it was all distorted in a sense. But I remember how big and sinister the smile was, and how time felt like it was slowed down or almost moving at a pace like strobe lights flashing, with each scene moving like an on/off switch from darkness to light and seeing things when it was light again. It is very hard to explain the feeling of terror I was experiencing and still feel when recalling this. I was so scared and discombobulated that I remember wanting to scream or say something but not being able to do so. I also remember that it was as if everyone else in the van were almost on autopilot because no one even saw or glanced over, not my 3 siblings or mom and dad. They were all just looking forward to their own worlds. I remember that there was a heaviness in the van, which I don't know how to explain, but it felt like there was both a static or electric feeling and thickness in the air. But after driving around a bend, the feeling dissipated, and suddenly I was able to hear the radio and my siblings talking. I yelled, "Did anyone else see that man in the woods?" And my mom said, "What man in the woods?" I tried to explain to them what I saw, but none of them believed me. To this day, I still vividly remember that night and the feeling, and I even took some friends down that road last summer when I was back there visiting my dad. I instantly started getting that same feeling I would get as a child when we turned onto the road. There was alfalfa growing then, so I could see right back to the tree line. I saw the area where I saw the stick man, and it made me realize how high up he was. So he was either standing on something, floating, or just that ducking tall. Nothing happened last time when I went back, but the feeling remained the same, and I would never want to be stuck driving that road by myself, whether it was day or night, because I have no desire to see that man or thing again. I should mention that the time I initially saw it was around dusk, and when me and my friends went back last summer, it was probably late afternoon or early evening, but it still creeped me out just like it always had all those years ago. There are so many other strange things I experienced as a child growing up in that area, and some of them make me wonder if they were just dreams or my imagination. But there are other things that I know are real, or at least are happening in this reality to either just myself and others simultaneously. I was driving with my mom along a very rural stretch of highway at night. You have to drive at least an hour to hit any towns. Think incredibly thick, dark forest on either side, and the road winds through the mountains, so it's a sheer drop on one side at many spots. Once we hit a clearing where the sky was actually visible, we both said wow in unison when we saw what looked to be a bright green meteorite or comet falling from the sky. It was very bright and very green. Now, I have other strange events in my childhood memory associated with this exact shade of bright green light occurring at night, but that's a story for another time, and I was in my teenage years, not a child, at this time. Due to the nature of the road, It was near impossible to determine exactly where the bright green object landed. However, by my and my mother's best determination, it landed about a mile up from where we were currently traveling. We both thought it was an amazing astronomical event to which we were lucky to bear witness, even if it was a little spooky, so we traveled on as normal. When we began to drive past the area where roughly the object might have made landfall, it was a very dark part of the road, with only a sliver of night sky visible and heavy dark forest on either side. My mom made a panic sound and hit the brakes on our trusty gold-colored minivan as a very large creature leapt onto the road before us, crossed the road, and disappeared into the thicket. While only illuminated for a moment in the headlights, we both got a good look at it, and immediately there was something very visually off about this animal. In our area of the world, deer and even bears are very commonly hit crossing roads, and we have hit and killed deer before. It was an awful experience, but it is very common and doubles down on the lesson to drive as defensively as possible. Luckily, my mom hit the brakes in time, and we did not make any physical contact before it headed off into the woods. We drove on a bit longer, the dark forest crowding us on either side. Once we finally broke the tree line and could smell the welcome miasma of the sea, along with the welcoming lights of town, my mom finally said something. "Did that animal look strange to you?" It had been burning a hole in my brain the whole time. I knew what I saw, but I was reluctant to admit it because of the sheer ridiculousness of it. And I realized that it still sounds so strange, it's a bit funny. I said it finally, "It looked like a very large hog with two butts on either side and no head." It sounds funny, I can agree, but at the time it was pretty creepy. My mom said that was exactly what she had seen as well. We drove on in silence and have hardly spoken of it ever since. So I live in a pretty dark rural area. One night I was driving home, rather late, or rather early, depending on how you look at it, when I saw this strange-looking guy with extremely pale, very white skin, very long legs, pedaling strangely on a bicycle that was entirely too small for him. Think of a very tall man on a child's bike. We made eye contact, and he looked at me very strangely at the stop sign. So I gunned my motor, drove rather quickly down the remainder of the road, down towards the dead end where I lived, parked my car, ran in, shut the lights off, and locked the doors behind me. My dog was alerted, and instead of greeting me as usual, he ran to the window and started barking. Okay? I thought. Anyway, that had me wondering, that was not at all like her, so I went to the window too, remembering my strange encounter with the tall, eerie man minutes before. It was very dark out. And I started to see the motion lights on the houses on the street start to come on in succession, one after another. Still looking, the light on the home on the corner across from us went off, and I heard a weird noise, accompanied by a clinking noise. Sort of like chains or keys, as well as loud stomping footsteps like someone was running hard. The dog was still barking. Then the lights started to go off one by one. And now I'm freaked all the way out. But nothing was there. I saw absolutely nothing. Nobody. There was nothing that could have caught up with my 8-cylinder, nobody running or even cycling on the road that could have set the lights off, just nothing. My dog made a weird cry and then went and laid down on the couch. When I went to her, she was shaking. She was a husky. To this day, I have no idea what that was all about. Nothing like that has ever happened to me before, and nothing has since. I have never seen the guy, nothing was missing, nothing was taken, and nobody's home was broken into. I have no idea who or what it could have been to make those noises or what set the lights off one by one like that. It was like something out of Stranger Things, except it happened about 25 years ago. I will always wonder what would have happened if I had been slower getting out of my car and getting into the house. Something in that odd guy I saw the stop sign, which made the hairs go up on my arm and made me book it for the comfort of my home, behind the safety of locked doors. I typically team drive, so we're rolling basically all the time. My co-driver had a death in the family and took like a week off, so I was solo driving. Which means I had to stop every night to sleep. I was coming back to Oz from MA and stopped for the night at this sketch little truck stop on I-40 at the Oz, NM border. I had dinner and then got in the bunk to sleep. Now most trucks have a curtain between the cab and the sleeper berth, plus curtains that wrap around the inside of the cab windshield and side windows, with the idea being if you're sleeping while your co-driver is driving, you close the sleeper curtain. If you're parked and sleeping, you close the cab curtains. It gives you more space. So, cab curtains closed, sleeper curtains open, I hit the bunk. Truck is idling for the AC. Some kind of noise wakes me up after being asleep for 4 or 5 hours. I'm waking up, a bit disoriented as I'm usually team driving. As I'm waking up, I see flashing red lights in the cab and I can hear the click click, click click of my hazard lights. They're on. I knew I hadn't left them on, Kind of freaked out as I realize only one way they could be on. Someone pushed the switch and it wasn't me. I jump up and grab what I keep for protection in the truck. I look into the cab. Sure enough, hazards are on. Then I notice that my GPS unit is missing off the dash. Shit. Someone has been in my truck while I've been sleeping. I move up into the driver's seat and pull the curtain back, peering outside expecting to see some scumbag running off with my GPS and whatever else. Everything seems quiet, but it's pretty dark. I open the curtains more, turn on my headlights and get a better look around. I see nothing. Shit, I think, they're gone. My $500 truck GPS is gone, probably other stuff is gone. I think to check the doors, they're both locked. WTF, how could that be? I look down and see my GPS unit hanging by the power cord. The suction cup came loose, the GPS fell off the dash and hit the hazard lights button on the way down. Son of a witch. What are the chances? I didn't sleep very well the rest of that night. Kind of funny now, but it scared me pretty good that night. I like team driving better. My friend and I were driving down a bunch of rural roads into the mountains one night. We were on our way to a campsite, but we were running late and got lost a few times, so it was really late at night. We hadn't passed anyone else on the opposite side for a good 45 minutes or so. The roads were really dark, of course, there were no street lights or anything. Then some huge truck was suddenly behind us. He was right on our tail for miles and miles. It didn't matter how fast we went, he was right there behind us. We traveled up mountains, down valleys, through tunnels, and past quite a few turnoffs, but this guy kept right up with us. Here we are, two girls in our early 20s, with no real sense of where we are, just that this road somehow was supposed to lead to this campsite, and this huge hick truck is barreling after us. Finally, we reach the camp, and there are quite a few cars and trailers, and you could see a few campfires flickering in the woods, so we knew people were still up. We get to the pull-up window, and my friend, who was the driver, starts giving her information to the lady, and I twist around in my seat to see the truck was gone. What a huge relief that was. One of the scariest nights of my life, that's for sure. It's not really a long road trip, but this is a weird one, which people don't believe me about. I was with my wife, and we had to pick up my sister-in-law from work at midnight. We left around 1130 and got there at 12. There was a bit of a rainstorm going on at the time. Anyway, we pick her up, and then on the way back, we take a shortcut, so instead of getting back for 30 minutes past midnight, we should get there for 15 to 20 minutes past. On a long stretch of road, there seems to be a really big metallic slab in the air with 6 circles on it. Think of a Lego. We drive past it and I don't say anything, and then a minute or two later, my wife says, "That was a really weird thing we drove past in the air," and her sister was like, "Yeah, I thought I was the only one." Anyway, carry on driving, and it feels like we are driving on the same stretch of road in a loop, the surroundings are the same, etc., non-stop. I carry on driving for what feels like at least 45 minutes to an hour, not really taking note, as my wife's sister is telling me which roads to take. It was only 5 to 6 roads, then we get home. We check the time, and it's past 1 a.m. How is it possible that a shortcut that was only meant to take 15 to 20 minutes took longer than the long way? And what was up with the weird object? And road? Many years ago, a friend and I decided to visit our mutual friend at her university and spend the weekend with her. We had extremely detailed directions to follow, and we were told the trip should take about 3 hours. While nothing went wrong on our drive, it seemed to take forever. I don't remember exactly at what point the woods started, but I do remember traveling through these woods for a long time, perhaps an hour. We were already well past the 3-hour time frame my friend had given us by the time we left the woods. When we finally reached my friend's college town, it had been nearly 4.5 hours since we'd left. We didn't get lost. We never hit traffic or stopped for more than a few minutes. But we quickly forgot about it since we were happy to spend the weekend with our friend. When the trip back was a little over 3 hours, we thought it was weird but didn't think much of it at the time. It wasn't until my next visit that I realized something had been strange. I spent that whole next trip waiting for the long path through the woods that we had been on the first time, but it never appeared. Following the same directions as the first time, the entire trip took me about 3 hours, as did every other trip I made out there in the following years. I don't know what happened, and I've never been able to replicate it. I still wonder what happened and where we really were when passing through those woods. Balmoria, Texas. I was driving across the country with my girlfriend from NYC. Google Maps takes us off the main road, but I zoom out to double check, and it looks like a good shortcut to get where we're going. The trail gets dustier, and suddenly we're at an open gate through which the road keeps going. I check the map again, and it looks okay, so we enter. I figure if the gate is wide open, we're probably safe. Passing a large barn, we suddenly saw about 15 huge dogs come running after us. Real big dogs. Barking, angry dogs. We keep driving as per Google's instructions, but the road suddenly ends, and there's a creek that we could in no way cross to keep driving. So, we managed to turn around with these huge dogs surrounding us and slowly drive back the other way. Only when we get back to the gate this time, it's closed. In our rear view, we see a golf cart sputtering towards us. It's an old lady. We roll down the window, not long before we hear, "Y'all better get the hell out of here now." We try to tell her we're sorry and explain what happened, but she's not hearing it. "If y'all hurt one of my dogs, I'm gonna shoot you." My girlfriend is freaking out, but the gate is closed, so the old lady pretty hilariously has to explain to us that it will open automatically if we approach it closer. It'll open automatically if you just pull up. So we drive up, and it starts to open, but we're too close to it, so we awkwardly back up to let it open all the way before hightailing the F out of there. Never take the shortcut in the middle of nowhere again. Back when I was in college, around 2015, I decided to visit my parents for the weekend. Home was only a 45-minute drive from my college town, but it was all rural roads and fields in the Texas Panhandle. I have driven this route many times before, at all times of the day or night. Now, the odd thing about this route is that there are the remnants of an old farmhouse school. The ones where there was only one huge room with one teacher to serve the kids who lived on nearby farms. The rumor is that this old schoolhouse burned down and that children died in the fire. This school is located right at the head of a T-junction. So I would have to stop in the middle of nowhere, stare straight ahead at the school, and make my left turn. I've always driven through here and never had a problem. I just kind of put the paranoia in the back of my mind. Well, one night after visiting my parents, like I mentioned earlier, as I was driving and getting close to this school, for some reason, I felt myself getting very uneasy. I just wanted to hurry up and get away from the school. I ignored it and just kept going. I got to the stop and just couldn't shake that feeling. I made my turn and just felt this feeling of dread overwhelm me. Like hairs on the back of my neck standing up. I'm driving, trying to stay calm, when my car starts making that dinging sound they make when you don't put your seatbelt on. I thought it was weird because I had my seatbelt on. Then my passenger airbag light in my dash turns on, and I'm just driving. My car is basically telling me I have a passenger when I damn well know that seat is empty. I know this isn't a malfunction because this car is relatively new and has never done that. I'm not sure how much time passed before the lights turned off, but it felt like an eternity. Realistically, it must have been a couple of seconds, but who's counting? I'm still freaked out, but the feeling of dread has passed and I've finally gotten back home. I sit around for a while and just process everything before going to bed and calling it a night. A couple years ago, a friend and I were going down the road on the way back from 7 to 11. It was super dark and stuff, and it was this long dirt road. Basically, that meant no cops, and we could speed to his place. About halfway back, I spot these two reflective eyes in a bush. I think it's probably a deer or a coyote or something, but I couldn't really see it because of the bush. After we passed it, I looked in the rearview mirror to try to get a better look at it. That's when I saw the eyes begin to move towards us. Mind you, our car is going about 80 to 90 miles per hour down this dirt road, and this thing is gaining on us. So I turn to my friend and ask him if he sees it. He looks back and says something along the lines of "What the hell is that?" and hits the gas. Now we're going about 100, and this thing is still gaining on us. Suddenly it's at my window, and I can see what looks like a greyhound dog running right beside my window on two legs. It stared at me the whole time and didn't break eye contact. We were so freaked out, and just before I went to snap a picture of it, it darted into a nearby bush. Scariest thing I've seen. A friend and I were driving to Stull, Kansas, to visit the cemetery there when Google Maps took us through Edgerton. The part we went through had lots of cornfields and was pitch ducking black. There are a few cars, it's around 12:30 a.m., I believe, but no one behind us at all. About halfway through our drive, suddenly my headlights decide to randomly turn off, to which we both freak out and I turn them back on. That repeats twice more. Okay, the duck. Doesn't happen again. Around 5 or so minutes later, there's a pair of extremely bright headlights that are oddly shaped and have a red tint to them, behind me, out of ducking nowhere. I start freaking out because I know for a damn fact no one was behind us for this long stretch of road, and before I knew it, the lights were practically right up on my ass, so naturally I speed the hell up to get away from it. I was going about 80 or 90 miles per hour in a 65 miles per hour zone because, duck that. We are finally out of sight of the headlights, and we have to turn left, so like a bat out of hell, I step on the gas and speed my merry ass down the road and out of sight of the crossroads. No one is behind us again, and we both breathe a sigh of relief. Shit, not 10 to 15 minutes later, the same exact headlights appear out of nowhere again. I'm like, duck this shit, I'm out and start speeding again. Eventually we lose sight of the headlights and reach the town. To which I went to park at the church across the way and almost drove my car straight into a decently sized pond or man-made lake type deal. Bummed because nothing happened at the cemetery. It was very pretty and quiet though. We leave about an hour later, and on the way back, we have to cross a set of train tracks. Something tells me to look to my right as we are about to cross over them, and there is a damn train speeding full force, maybe 20 feet away. The gates were not down, and there were no lights flashing. The conductor blew the horn shortly after I saw it. That SHT is one of my biggest fears. I don't mess with trains, man. The next day, we were telling my friend's mom about the trip but didn't mention the headlights incident to not worry her. She then pipes up and says she had been reading something about the Stull Cemetery having guardians that appear as lights or speeding vehicles with bright lights behind you, and sometimes they will try to run you off the road. My friend and I froze and then promptly told her what happened. In August last year, I took a road trip with a friend. It was about 10 p.m. as we were driving along the 18-mile-long Atchafalaya Bridge towards New Orleans. That area is naturally so spooky with the huge cypress trees on either side of you, so dark, and nothing but swamp underneath you for almost 20 miles. We passed a man walking down the highway right on the shoulder. It seems like it could be a normal guy just walking, if you ignore the fact that we're in the middle of a swamp. But what was weird was that this guy was in a rather ghoulish getup. Tattered, almost shredded-looking clothing was hanging off his body as he seemed to be hobbling along. All pale white, with an almost glowy sheen about him. Looked like a textbook ghost. You know the spookiest part? I, the passenger, turned around right as we passed him. Lo and behold, bro was gone. I didn't see him behind us, even though we had just passed him. It wasn't necessarily a matter of darkness either, there were other cars traveling, so he should have been visible in their passing headlights behind us. Of course, my assumption that this dude was a ghost is probably an asshole assumption. He could have been a person without resources, without clean clothes, just trying to get somewhere, which is really ducking unfortunate. But there's no doubt that this person had a very wraith-like look about him. The clothes, the coloration, the disappearing into thin air no matter his circumstances, he was a ghoul. I like to think we drove by a phantom of the swamp. Apparition or not, I hope the fellas are doing okay. A few years ago, my dad and I were out driving in the countryside. This isn't something super uncommon, as we love going on drives late at night and just chit-chatting and listening to music for a few hours. It was about 1 or 2 a.m., and we were on a straight road with farmers' fields on the left and a tall forest on the right. It was pitch black out there with the exception of the moonlight because there were not too many houses out that way. We usually just drive to random places and use the GPS to get back if we get a bit lost. As you can guess, we got a bit lost and were ready to head home, so my dad pulled over to the right side of the road, forest side, to plug his GPS in quickly and set it to go home. As soon as he starts pulling over and I look up, I was looking at my phone before that. If I'm not mistaken, I am frozen. Right in front of and a bit to the right of our car is a man standing on the side of the road, looking into the forest. I believe he was wearing a hat and a sweatshirt, or possibly a hoodie, but I remember never seeing his face. My dad starts hooking up the GPS, sets it to home, and starts back on the road. Keep in mind that he never once moved, and there was no one else out there. I remember seeing him because he was illuminated by our headlights, but my dad never once made note of him or looked at him. I remember that as soon as I saw him, I was basically frozen. We got a few hundred meters up the road, and I remember I just said quite loudly, "Why on earth did you stop?" And he seemed extremely puzzled. He asked what I meant, and I said, "You stopped right beside the guy on the side of the road." And I remember him saying to me, "What guy?" And a chill almost came over me because I was so freaked out. I've brought this memory up a few times since then, and he still proclaims he saw no one. The weirdest thing about it for me was how completely frozen I was. This guy didn't look extremely out of place clothing-wise. Maybe out for an evening stroll kind of clothing. What freaked me out was how we pulled right up next to him and he didn't move one bit, how my dad saw no one when it was pitch black out and he was right in front of our car lit up by the headlights, and how I was so frozen. Every time I think back on it, I think about how, in that situation, my first instinct would be, what is that guy doing out here? Let's go, he's freaking me out, but instead I stayed quiet and eerily calm until we were further up the road. In southern Wisconsin, where I grew up, there was a place called Weary Road that was supposed to be haunted. It was one of those spooky stories high schoolers told each other that everybody knew wasn't true, but you had to check it out for yourself just to be sure. It was about 20 minutes down this desolate dirt road through cornfields until you reached a 90-degree turn that immediately crossed a small bridge over a stream. This was the haunted spot. If you turned your car off on the bridge, it wasn't supposed to start again, but the road was narrow and you couldn't turn around, so you had to continue on the road to leave. Beyond the bridge, the road had massive oak trees on either side that arched high across the road, creating a tunnel-like effect. I'd previously gone to Weary Road several times with friends, knew it was all bullshit, but loved the novelty of it, so I never turned down an offer to go. The last time I went, however, was with only one other person. Normally I'd go with a group, so there being only two of us made it more exciting. We turned the car off on the bridge, nothing happened, and we headed out. It was midnight in late autumn, so everything was leafless, and the giant oak's limbs were spidery and much spookier than normal. We drove in silence, and as we started down the tunnel of oaks, I glanced at one of the trees as we passed it, and what I saw skittered my ducking nerves. In the trunk of the tree, there was a woman. Like a ducking woman in the tree, life-size, staring out at the road. Her face had features, and she had clothes and a figure. It wasn't like finding Jesus in a potato chip. It was a whole ducking woman in the trunk of a massive tree. I held my breath as we passed, fixating on the story of the woman who hung herself in a tree on Weary Road. I'd seen all of those oaks many times before, but never any shapes in any of the trunks, let alone a whole human figure. I rationalized it quickly. It's like finding shapes in clouds, I told myself. You psyched yourself up, and your brain is playing tricks on you, and now you're so nervous you're finding shapes in bark, of all things. As soon as we exited the oak tunnel, I let out a breath. I felt like I should mention to my friend what I'd just seen, maybe share a laugh at my overactive imagination, and he would put me at ease. I broke the silence in a whisper, "Did you see that?" He paused and glanced apprehensively at me. "The woman in the tree?" My heart stopped, and his eyes widened. We got the duck out of there as fast as we could. I've never been superstitious, and I don't believe in ghost stories, but I also haven't returned to Weary Road since. It still gives me chills to think about it. Driving through Wisconsin late at night. Most of the drive is farmland. Me and my friend were heading back from Oshkosh, planning on staying at a friend's house. I haven't been there in a while, but I remember the general location. He lives in an old family-owned farmhouse. We're in the area when I tell my friend to look out for the address. Here's the scene. There is a heavily wooded area to my left and farm fields to my right. At 11 o'clock at night, it's barren on the small road leading to a farm here and there. My friend says, "That's it, right?" We park on the dirt road and walk up to the door. Right as we were about to knock, my friend grabbed my shoulder. I turn to look at him when I see an extremely tall, skinny, human-built creature standing outside the forest. No eyes. No anything. Just blank. Just writing this gives me chills. I tell my friend to get the car started. I started jogging. I watch as this thing sweeps its head, watching us run to the car. This next part makes everyone skeptical. It takes long, slow strides towards us. I'm shitting myself at this point when I throw it into reverse, trying to get the duck out of there. I get out onto the road, ready to turn the wheels to speed the duck out. I looked back to see where it was. I am not joking. This thing is maybe 10 feet away from my car. I floor it and get the duck out, not looking back. Get a hotel downtown. The next day, call a friend who lived there. He says he didn't believe us. I am never going back to that place. Ever. Again. I was about 17 when my friend was driving some backcountry roads within the county while I drank beer in the passenger seat. As we drive, I have to stop and take the occasional piss. After one of my liquid purges, I got back into the old Chevy Blazer, and my friend turned the headlights back on. Before he could put it into drive, I saw something shining back at me in a ditch about 50 yards up on the right side. "What's that?" I asked. My friend put the vehicle into drive, pulled up a bit further, and steered it sideways just a bit so that his headlights were shining directly onto this mystery. They were pig carcasses. At least a dozen of them. They were all dead and gutted. They were in a giant, blood-soaked pile, with some of their dead eyes gazing back at us nonchalantly. My friend whipped the car into reverse, and we noped the duck out of there. Our best guess was that the pigs were stolen and slaughtered somewhere else. The carcasses were just brought to this random spot and dumped away. In hindsight, we should have changed the police, but we were scared. We figured that whoever did this didn't do it alone, and we didn't want any part of it. Years ago, two friends and I were driving down to the Outer Banks from Virginia late at night. Once you cross into North Carolina, the beach highway gets pretty rural, nothing around for miles, and it gets pitch black. We were chugging along when suddenly my friend driving muttered, "What the duck?" and started to slow down. We looked out the windscreen and saw a woman with dark hair and a torn-up white dress just standing on the side of the road with her back to us. We slowed way down, but she still didn't turn around. When we were right behind her, my friend rolled down the window a little and called out, "Hey, are you okay?" This witch whipped around and let out the loudest poltergeist-ass scream I've ever heard. I've never seen a banshee, but I'm pretty sure that's what they look and sound like. Black hair, pale skin, and black eyes. I peed a little. She ran across the road in front of the car, still screaming, and disappeared into the woods. My friend hit the gas pedal, and we got the fuck out of there. I would have seriously doubted my own sanity if 2 other people hadn't witnessed it. She looked like a freaking demon. Once we got a cell phone signal again, we called the local police and reported it. It turns out there was a beach house off the road nearby that a special needs group was staying at, and one of the mentally handicapped women had wandered off and gotten lost. I felt bad that we left her once we knew what was going on, but damn if I didn't think that witch was possessed at the time. About 2 months ago, 2 former co-workers and I were on our way home to North Georgia from a business trip in Jacksonville, Florida. We decided to leave late in the day as we had been in Florida working for about a month straight, 12 hours a day, 7 days a week. Yeah, it was a garbage place to work, so as you can imagine, we were quite ready to get home. Now it's a very long drive from Florida to North Georgia. It especially feels so when you leave at almost 7 p.m., so by the time we actually get within the area close to our office, it's close to 2 a.m. now. If you've ever been to North Georgia, you know it's just miles and miles of backroads with almost nothing but trees and some houses sparsely spread around said backroads. So on one of these backroads, my friend driving had to pee really badly, and there were no places to stop at a restroom, so we had to stop on the side of the road in the middle of the woods next to a steep drop-off near a very small, old house with a dimly lit front porch. So finally my friend gets out to pee and I'm just sitting there with the window rolled down next to me whilst on my phone. They were heavy smokers, so I kept my window down at all times practically, but then I heard in the darkness of the woods a very strange sound, almost like an owl but different in a way that's hard to describe. So I look around and notice that even though it was a full moon that night, it was dark, unnaturally dark even on the road where there was nothing covering the moon, not even clouds. I then looked towards my friend who was standing outside the truck, and no joke, I saw a shadow, a full-bodied shadow pass by him, a shadow in the shape of a man almost. He quickly ran back to the truck as he not only saw it but felt it as well, put the truck in drive, and floored it, speeding out of there as fast as we could. Our other coworker didn't see it and asked what that was about. After we told him, he explained to us that he'd had this very uneasy feeling when we pulled up there, and then we told each other we felt the same. I'm not exaggerating when I say that on that one particular road I've never felt more dread or malice in my entire life. It was one of the strongest sensations I've ever felt, and then when we got off the road, the feeling completely disappeared, as did the almost blinding darkness. Obviously, I was still frightened, but the other feelings were just instantly driven away. To this day, I do everything I can to avoid going down that road. 3 friends and I were driving down a gravel road to a cemetery one night for spooks and giggles. The cemetery and the property around it were locally rumored to have a lot of supernatural activity going on dating back several hundred years. This is in rural Tennessee, and let me tell you, urban legends ain't got shit on rural legends. I've heard stories of an old hag witch that lived deep in the woods in the early 1900s around this cemetery and could shape-shift. I've heard stories of grown men, the tough, redneck type, the type that ain't scared of a damn thing, turning ghost white and tearing up when telling about their encounters with the white thing while out hunting in these woods. The white thing has supposedly been witnessed by several sound-minded people over the past 200 years or so, starting when settlers first started populating the area. All descriptions passed down through the years are very similar, although bizarre, a white goat-like creature that flies above the trees and shrieks. Like a local Jersey devil. Enough backstory. Anyway, we were driving down the gravel road. I was in the back seat, passenger side, looking forward when I saw something out of the corner of my eye to my right, outside of the car. I turned to look and see a deer running full force straight towards my window. It was a slight mid-air leap, like the deer was at the same level as my window and was no more than an arm's length from crashing through the window and straight into my face. I knew I was about to get really ducked up, so I covered my head and neck with my arms, closed my eyes, and just braced myself. Nothing. I opened my eyes just in time to see the deer trotting off, on the other side of the car. We all saw it. We all agreed there was no way the deer could have cleared the top of the car. It was too low to the ground. There was no way it had some kind of Spider-Man moment and somehow got on the roof and jumped off. We would have heard its hooves. All four agreed that the only explanation supported by what we witnessed was that the deer went through the car. We were freaked out as hell for about an hour but eventually went on about our night. Fast forward a few years, and I'm telling this story to a friend who is from the same town. It turns out she knows several people, herself included, that this exact same thing happened to on the exact same road.